And so we just take it for granted, so much of this. No, that's right. It's not very often. So we have some new members that I want to introduce you to today. We have Shay and Hannah and Sawyer Stellar. Are they with us this morning? Would y'all stand where you are, just so people can know where you are? Okay, we're so grateful to have you with us. And we also have Mark and Missy Wood. Are they here? Yeah, stand there. Mark and Missy Wood. We're blessed to have you all with us. We're going to be talking about life groups a little bit this morning, and in fact, our service is going to kind of be built around life groups next week. I want to encourage you new families, all of you families, to get involved in a life group. And as I said, there'll be more said about that. Well, being that it's back to school, and we'll have more to say about that later too, I have a test for you this morning. It's a 7-question test. I want you to grade yourself, okay? And see if you pass. Everybody ready? What country makes Panama hats? Ecuador. Did anyone get that one right? Did you really, John? Okay, let's see if you get this one. In what month does Russia celebrate the October Revolution? That would be November. I'm sorry, November is the answer to that one. How long was the 100-Year War? 116 years. From what animal do we get catgut? Now, you have 2 chances at this one. And it's not a cat. It's either a horse or a sheep. The Canary Islands are named after what kind of animal? Anyone think it's a canary bird? Now, you know better now than to answer that, don't you? Think canine. It's named after dogs. Okay. What color is a purple finch? Someone said it'd be red. How many are passing so far? Got one last question for you. How long human beings? And even when we think we know something, especially guys who are married, even when we think we know something, we often find out that we're wrong, right? Not the case with God. No calculus and no microbiology and quantum physics. God knows every test question that's ever been asked. He doesn't know headline current events either. God knows everything. He knows everything, as David's going to tell us this morning in this psalm. He knows everything about you and me. Personally. He doesn't just know our names and our addresses. He knows everything about us. And that's an awesome thing, isn't it? That's a wow, as Jacob put it this morning. Because our world can and does often leave us feeling like we're just statistical data, rather than being a meaningful individual. Because after all, we are just a speck in galaxy that's measured by light years rather than by miles. And the immensity of all of that, does it ever just overwhelm you? So that you ask questions like, who am I? And why am I here? What matters? If you ask yourself questions like that, I have the psalm for you. It is one of David's best, and it's one of my favorite. And so you can follow along on the slides, or I encourage you. I do this really for my benefit because I don't like taking my readers on and off, and I can just read it off the monitor. I really want to continue to encourage you to open up your own Bibles as we study. But I think the key verse in Psalm 139 is found in verse 14, where David says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. You see, I'm convinced that wonder, and so I want us to look this morning at these four wonders of God that we find in Psalm 139. The first of which is, He knows me. How many of you know or have known a president of the United States? Now, I'm talking about maybe, how many of you have even just been introduced to or met a president? Okay, I see maybe a dozen hands go up. But how many of you know a president to where he would be able to call you by name? I don't see any hands going up. And very few of us do. Because it's not often that people know the person at the top. And so it's only natural for we humans to think, well, since that's the way it is in our world, that's the way it is with God too. How could this ruler of the universe have the slightest idea who I am? And so David opens this psalm with these words. You have searched me, Yahweh, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. Hem me in behind, before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. David is fascinated that this creator of the universe can know the created like that. So much so that he mentions it 5 times in these verses. David pictures himself passively sitting down. He pictures himself actively rising up. And I think it's his way of saying that. And so there was this vacuum cleaner salesman right in the middle of the floor. And then he began bragging. He said, I guarantee you, the super duper vacuum cleaner will pick up all the dirt that I poured on the floor. It doesn't. I will eat what's left. She left for a moment and came back with a spoon and said, get started, our electricity's out. Wouldn't it be great to have a foreknowledge of things? Well, God sees our thoughts even before we fully, at every moment of every day. Jesus said this one time in Matthew 10 and verse 30. He said, and even the very hairs of your head are numbered. Let's understand something Jesus wasn't doing here. Jesus wasn't saying God can beat you at Trivial Pursuit. That's not his point. And God doesn't even have to sit and count our heads. And I'm seeing some real shiners out there, you know. I've got one myself. We're not much of a challenge to him. But it's not like he has to sit and count. That's not what it's talking about. God just knows it. He just knows it because he's omniscient. He's fully aware and accurately aware of everything at every moment. So how well does God know you? He couldn't know you any better than he does right now. Now, how does that make you feel? Does that thought bring you comfort? Or does that thought make you uneasy? And I think if we're really being totally honest, we would say it's a little bit of both. Right? I remember being terrified as a kid in church when we would sing this old song, and I'm so glad we don't sing it anymore. there's an all-seeing eye watching you. Watching you, watching you. Every day, mind the course you pursue. And I was just terrified by that thought when I was younger. And even David seems a little uncertain. We're going to see momentarily where he talks about, even if I try to hide in the darkness, you know. He seems uncomforted, and comforted at the same time. He says, you hem me in verse 5. And that doesn't mean that God hems us in like a jail. It means God puts a protection around us. And he says, you place your hand upon me. And that doesn't mean like a policeman reaching out to nab you. It means, I think it goes back to the Old Testament idea of a father giving a blessing to his child. In the Old Testament, this was very important, that a father would lay his hand on his children and he would impart to them a blessing. And God does that for you and me. He imparts a blessing to us. And as David contemplates all this, he says in verse 6, such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. I think a modern day version, David would just say, it blows my mind. Or as Jacob said, wow. Well, the second wonder of God is that He's close to me. Years ago, Bette Midler sang this song, and there was a line in the chorus that said, God is watching us from a distance. And it was a beautiful song. Poor theology. But let's not be too quick to judge, because we even sing songs here together that sometimes have some poor theology. There is beyond the azure blue a God concealed from human sight. God is with us. He's not far off beyond the azure blue. He's right here in this room with us today. And so David says this in verse 7, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? Even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. In Hebrew, the pronouns that are used in these verses are abrupt and emphatic, so that it's as if David, if you were reading in the original, David is basically saying, if I go up to heaven, you. If I am in the depths of the sea, you. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, which is another way of saying, if I could travel at the speed of light, you. One who is conforming themselves to God. His name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. Not God beyond the azure blue. God with us. Verse 11 says, if I say surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. I can remember a time when I was scared to go to bed. And Beverly would reach over and tell me, it's okay, Rick. No. This goes way back before that, okay? When I was a kid, I can remember being scared to go to bed. I can't imagine that it didn't have something to do with the fact that my parents let me watch The Twilight Zone when I was a kid. But I can remember lying in bed and thinking if I could pull the sheet up real tight under my neck, and if I could just lie real still, that the boogeyman would think I was dead and would leave me alone. I'm serious. I literally remember thinking that. And I'm not sure that's so different than we oftentimes think about God. If I could just find a dark place, maybe I'll go unnoticed. But David says darkness isn't darkness to you. Darkness is as light to you. So this is not good news if you're trying to cover something up, is it? But this is good news if you're in a place in your life where you're trying to travel through darkness, to know that you have one with you who can see as light in that darkness. The third wonder of God is that He made me. And yet in this psalm, prenatal stages of development are pictured with amazing clarity and simplicity. You, because I am fearfully, is involved in this process of creating every human being in our world. Personally involved. When David says the depths of the earth here in verse 15, he's using a Hebrew idiom. In the context of what he's saying here, he's talking about his mother's womb. And he talks about his unformed body in verse 16. David's talking about when he was an embryo. And in those days, right after conception, what David is saying is God was busy creating, forming David. Aren't our bodies amazing? I was thinking about this week as I was studying this. I was thinking about how much our body does that's just automatic. When's the last time you had to tell your heart, it's time to beat? Or when have you had to tell your lungs, okay, inhale, now exhale? And think about this. Our heart and lungs know when to speed up or slow down as our bodies need them to. And you cut yourself, and you don't even have to think about it, but you cut yourself, and immediately your body goes into the business of healing that place. And when we go from darkness to light or light to darkness, we don't have to manually do a refocus of our iris. It just happens. Is that not amazing? It's incredible. And so he says in verse 17, how precious are your thoughts, God? How vast is the sum of them? Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I awake, I'm still with you. God doesn't just make us on an ascent. God's thoughts are constantly with us, and God greets us each morning with fresh mercies and with new opportunities. Can you begin to feel, are you feeling the enthusiasm that David felt as he wrote this psalm? I'm wanting you to. We ought to just be so excited and standing in awe of this God we serve. Which brings us to the fourth section. God protects and helps me. Have you ever seen a post on Facebook? Maybe you've seen a post on Facebook where it'll be partially a psalm, and the psalm will be in real flowery letters, and around it will have butterflies and ladybugs, and maybe the background is a mountain stream or some kind of beautiful setting. The first 2/3 of this psalm you could do that with. But the verses we're getting ready to read, you're not going to find them on one of those Facebook posts. Because here's what David says. If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Yahweh, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Here's a guarantee: you will not go to a Christian bookstore and find those words on a coffee mug or on a t-shirt. What's going on here? Why does David drop that here in this psalm? I want to give it a shot. David had a heart for God. But David was a warrior. And I want you to notice the subject of his words: the wicked, the bloodthirsty, the evil, the adversaries of God, the haters of God, the rebellious. These were not moderate, passive foes of God. These were unashamed despisers of God and His Word and His people. And David is asking God to remove his enemies so that they will not have influence on David's life. And if you're a warrior in David's time, how do you take care of your enemies? You slay them. Now, here's what kind of makes this ugliness beautiful, is that David is about God. There's things that are said in the Psalms that are just the outcries of people's hearts, and the beauty is God lets them say it. I despise those who repay your goodness with disrespect. Comes his final request in verse 23, when he says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." This is the prayer of a man who genuinely wants to be as pleasing to God as he possibly can be. He wants to be God's man at all costs. And so he invites God to make an examination. God, way down deep inside, examine me. Down in those places where unspoken thoughts dwell. Down in those places where unstated motives hide out. God, search it all. Not that God's going to discover something new about David. That's not the point of this. It's so that God can reveal to David things that David isn't even aware of. It's kind of like if you were to have exploratory surgery. The exploratory surgery is not ultimately for the benefit of the surgeon. The exploratory surgery is so that you can find out about yourself. Is this a prayer that you want to pray? Do you desire to become a person whose walk with God is so intimate and so deep? Or do you view Christianity simply as a ticket to heaven? Mary Ann Bird, in her book, The Whisper Test, tells about when she was growing up and she knew that she was different, and in her own words, she said, "I hated it." And here's her story. She said, "I was born with a cleft palate, and when I started school, my classmates made it clear to me how I looked to others. A little girl with a misshapen lip, crooked nose, lopsided teeth, and garbled speech. When schoolmates asked, 'What happened to your lip?' I'd tell them I'd fallen and cut it with a piece of glass. Somehow it seemed more acceptable to have suffered an accident than to have been born differently. I was convinced that no one outside my family could love me. There was, however, a teacher in the second grade whom we all adored. Mrs. Leonard was her name. She was short, round, happy, a sparkling lady. Annually, we had a hearing test. Mrs. Leonard gave the test to everyone in the class, and finally it was my turn. I knew from past years that as we stood against the door and covered one ear, she would sit at her desk and whisper something, and we would have to repeat it back. Things like, "The sky is blue," or "Are those new shoes?" I waited there for those words that God must have put into her mouth, those 7 words that changed my life. Mrs. Leonard whispered, "I wish you were my little girl." And oh, brothers and sisters, what I want you to hear from this psalm this morning is God saying to you, I want you to be my child. Because you see, maybe you have had important people in your life say things to you that still ring in your ears. Hurtful things. Maybe you've been rejected verbally or emotionally or physically. But I want you to know this morning. Do not let another flawed human being define you and who you are. You let the God of Psalm 139 tell you who you are. And so I want us to stand, if you would. And at this time, we offer an invitation to any who might want to come. We're going to have a baptism in just a moment. Or maybe you would like to come forward and ask for prayers, or go to room 102 and meet with an elder and his wife there to pray. But I want us all to recite this. And this is our last psalm for our summer series. Way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Amen. Let's sing.